All right, so we're back. And this is the first video in the sort of second set of videos with the overall theme being publishing and presenting your research in academic journals and conferences. The first set of videos, the first four, we're really talking more about publishing in academic journals for the most part, but also in maybe professional newsletters, things like that. These last two videos are more about conferences. First, getting your work accepted into conferences, and then about making great presentations at conferences. And just to give the broader agenda here, you have it. The first four videos, as I said, more about publishing. These last two, here's where we're at, and number 5, getting work accepted into conferences. And maybe a first question to address is why? Why might you want to do this? We did this with publishing as well. Why you might want to publish your research? Let me think about for a second why you might want to present your work at conferences. It's nerve-wracking. It's more work. It sometimes can involve out-of-pocket expenses. So why would we put ourselves through all this? Well, a bunch of different reasons why we want to present at academic conferences. First, one would be networking. And I think sometimes networking, especially in educational circles, sort of gets has a maybe a negative connotation to it, and with the view that it's just for people in business. Networking is not just about it's not just for people in business. Certainly, and I've made lots of great connections for my research, for my teaching, professional development, different collaborations have come up through networking opportunities I've had at conferences. So it's a great time. In a way, in the last video I talked about publishing and getting to know journals, editors, and that's something you can also do at conferences. Get to know, go up and talk to editors of journals that you're interested in submitting to, and ask them about whether you think a particular paper might be relevant or within the scope of the journal, to get suggestions on submitting to them. Lots of different reasons, networking wise, that we might want to be at conferences. There are lots of different, generally conferences also are going to have workshops and other opportunities for professional development. And so that's another reason we want to be there. For whatever field or domain you're working in, we always can be increasing our knowledge. We want to get access to the latest research. It's probably the number one reason why a lot of us go to academic conferences, to find out what's happening, what sort of research is happening right now before it even makes it into the published literature, because we know that published research, that there's a lag time in terms of when research gets published, and then it goes through the review process, which we know from the last video can take a long time. And then by the time it actually sees its way to print, can be years after it's actually conducted. Whereas research being presented at conferences is usually ongoing, happening right then. Oftentimes being analyzed on the airplane, the data being analyzed on the airplane to the actual conference. So yeah, just an example there. Most journals move slowly. One of those journals that I work with, currently accepting for 2018. That varies a lot, but in conferences, that you're getting the current research. At conferences, you can also, of course, meet your favorite scholars. That can in some ways help us to see them in more human ways. Sometimes we read about different scholars, we admire them, and we see them as sort of maybe untouchable, idealized figures, but I think in conferences we come across them and interact with everybody in a very human level, and it sort of brings everybody down to earth in a way. Not everybody, but a lot of people. You can certainly identify and meet potential collaborators if you're in the same talks as certain people. If people are at your talks or you're at their talks, it's a great way to meet up with people that you might be able to collaborate with on a project, to collect data together, to analyze something together, try out a new idea. Most of the time, conferences also have an exhibition hall where different publishers will come and show and sell books. And so, of course, you can buy books. We can also check out new books and see what's coming out, to make sure you're current in terms of relevant texts or different types of publications that might be relevant to your own work. And while you're at those, you can also meet with the acquisitions editors. If you have an idea for a book, that's why they're there. The acquisition editors from different publishing houses are there to acquire, to commission new books. And they want to talk with you. If you want to talk with them, they want to talk with you about ideas you have, whether they're ideas that you would want to realize in book form, or whether they're just ideas that you think you see a niche or a need for a particular book to be written. They want to know about that, and they're often very interested in meeting with scholars. So don't be shy to if you're interested or you want to talk to book editors from different publishing houses, to go up and talk to them, and they're more than interested in willing and interested to talk to you. Another great reason to be at conferences, not only to be there, but also to present your work, is because we get feedback before submitting. We know that the peer review process can be kind of grueling in lots of ways, and this way you sort of present at a conference, you get that feedback immediately before you go through the grueling review process. So you present, and imagine you're presenting in a room of 20 or 30 or 50 people, and afterwards there's time for discussion. They're going to give you feedback, and it hopefully strengthen your manuscript before it goes out for review. So you can sort of stem off some of those issues that might be raised later, and you have a stronger submission, stronger initial submission to the journal. And then fun. I know it might sound too intellectual to be fun, but if you're not a regular attendee of conferences, I encourage you to check it out. I have a great time. Of course, it's intellectually stimulating, but also you get to be with a bunch of people who are interested in the same things as you, and that can be a lot of fun. And of course, just the fact that some of our colleagues who might be away at conferences in say Barcelona are here right now, and so that's also pretty fun. You oftentimes get to travel, right? And so that's a great reason also to attend and present at conferences. So how about getting your abstract accepted? So this is something, if we've established that we want to be present at conferences, we want to have a presence, we want to be there, we want to present, how do we go about doing that? Well, this is actually, we have to write a proposal, of course, right? And so when you write a proposal, it's usually an abstract of the presentation that you want to give. Usually somewhere in the realm of 200 or 300 or 400 words long. So it has a title and an abstract, sometimes keywords, sometimes a brief summary in addition to that of about 50 words. Depends on the conference. So of course, pay close attention to the guidelines that are required for submission to each conference. A colleague of mine and I actually were interested in this idea of what makes a good abstract. And so we did a study, actually. We collected almost 300 abstracts that were submitted to a conference that I was one of the co-organizers of. And this is, by the way, I'll mention, is just for one particular field. So these findings might not pertain to all fields. But we looked at all these abstracts, and we sort of, being linguists, we analyzed the abstracts in relation to a couple different variables. We looked at the linguistic and the stylistic features of those abstracts, right? Doing both automatic and hand coding analyses of the abstracts. And we looked at those features, the linguistic and stylistic features, to see how they might be related to the abstract scores. Because when you submit an abstract to a conference, if you're not familiar with this, what happens is the organizers collect all those abstracts, and then they send them out to, kind of like simulating the peer review process for a journal, they send them out to raters who might be part of the organizing committee of the conference or just other professionals in the field. And then they rate them, usually on a rubric using a number of different criteria. And so we were interested in figuring out, might there be certain linguistic and stylistic features that are associated with higher scores? So so before I get to those results, just maybe think to yourself, any particular features of abstracts you can think of that might be associated with higher or lower scores? And maybe take a guess as to what do you think might be the feature that was associated with, most strongly associated with high scores? Well, it's actually pretty similar. The number one predictor of high abstract ratings is actually similar to what's been found before with things like ACT essays and SAT essay scores. So if you want to get a high score on those, what do people usually recommend? Same thing for abstracts. We'll get to that in a second. But so we looked at correlations or relationships, quantitative relationships between a number of continuous abstract features like word length and number of nouns through automatic linguistic analyses. And then we compared the mean scores based on categorical features like the presence of different discourse moves in an abstract, like the inclusion of an introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So do we have to have all those four moves? Are they necessary? Is one more obligatory and important, or more strongly associated with a higher or lower score in an abstract? So we're trying to figure out break down the abstract and figure out how can we come up with like a formula for more successful abstract writing, is what we were essentially trying to do using linguistic analyses. We also did carried out a procedure called multiple regression, which some of you I'm sure are familiar with, others might not be familiar with. It's just a way of explaining variance or variability in scores based on multiple predictor variables. Things like those variables we listed there, like length, use of nouns, different discourse moves, things like that. So overall results, turns out that the strongest predictor of abstract scores was total words. And so you don't have to pay attention to all the data here if you're not used to looking at output tables for regression analyses. But the bottom line is that overall, these 7 predictor variables, total words, number of nouns, total words in the discussion section of an abstract. So like the end of the abstract, we talked about which is essentially like the mini discussion section describing the results and interpreting the results. Citations, citing previous literature, past tense verbs, inclusion of errors, and first person pronouns. That collection of 7 variables predicted 35% or explained 35% of the variance in abstract scores. That's kind of a lot. About a third of the scores could be explained, not by the content of the abstracts, just by these linguistic and stylistic features. Now note that not all of these features were associated with higher scores. So the ones with the negative B or beta values here were associated with lower scores. So more discussion words are associated with lower scores. And so the idea there being that so when they had fewer words in the discussion section, they actually got higher scores. Of course, this makes perfect intuitive sense. Fewer errors, and by that we're talking about grammatical or mechanical errors. Fewer errors were also associated with higher scores in the abstracts. Makes sense. And then fewer first-person pronouns also associated with higher scores. So a little bit more distancing on the part of authors of abstracts were associated with higher scores. Excuse me. So implications of this study, and again, this wouldn't necessarily apply to all fields, but in our field of second language research, second language education, the implications are, in terms of writing abstracts that will help them be accepted, that we do want to cite relevant literature. Okay, it's good to show that you're familiar with what's been done before in your area, to sort of show that you're you have insider knowledge. Want to definitely include details of the method and the results. If you're proposing a study in your abstract, in your proposal, you want to make sure you talk about the method and results. Those are very, very important sections to include. You want to keep the discussion section of the abstract, and you only have 300 or 400 words anyway. Keep that section very brief. You can save it for the presentation. But you definitely want to make sure you utilize the maximum word length and include as much information as possible. It should be a very, very informationally rich piece of prose, right? So make sure you use all the space you have. If you have 300 words, aim to use as close to 300 words as possible, and you should pack in as much information as possible, especially related to the methods and results of the study. And you want to focus on what was actually done and found. So you want to take a kind of objective stance. You don't want to use too much in the way of first-person pronouns or qualify the findings too much. You want to just be as objective as possible, think scientific writing for the most part. And of course, you want to have no errors. You want to make sure it's proofread and then grammatically and mechanically that the abstract is perfect. Okay, so those are my suggestions for putting together abstracts that will be successful, and by successful I mean highly rated and therefore accepted into conferences. I'll stop there. Next up, I've got, once you get accepted into the conferences, 10 tips for making great presentations at conferences. Okay, so I'll stop right there. Thanks.